my name's Seb. Hey, it's nice to be here, nice to be talking about horror games, everybody. Huzzah. So, I kind of feel like, and let's see if I can advance the slide. Yes! So with apologies to Ewan, I think horror is kind of weird as a genre, right? It's kind of really weird and odd as a genre label applied to games. Because most genre labels that you apply to games, like think RPG or side-scrolling shoot 'em up, right? They imply or they specify a certain kind of system or like a certain facet of the game's mechanics, like, you know, experience points and leveling up and maybe stats, or there are ships coming at you and you fire bullets and stuff. But horror doesn't. So whereas these genre labels kind of describe like sort of mechanics, which I would sort of call point A, and then leave the player experience to be implied, and that's point B. Horror just describes the player experience, or intended player experience, right? Like, if the game scares you, if you find it horrifying and terrifying, then that's a horror game. And it leaves A, which is the mechanics and the systems that kind of interact to kind of produce that experience, to be implied as well. And I think that's one of the reasons why when we kind of analyze horror games, we look at horror, the genre of horror, we don't necessarily always look at kind of game mechanics or systems that are in place to kind of set up scares and terrify us. So, we talked a bit about Five Nights at Freddy's earlier. There we go, that's a picture of Freddy Fazbear, isn't he cute? I have a pet theory about Five Nights at Freddy's, and since you're kind of like my captive audience, I'm going to muse aggressively at you. So, like as we discussed, part of the gameplay in Five Nights at Freddy's is it kind of involves you being kind of overwhelmed by all these menial tasks that you have to do. So you pop up a screen to look at these security cameras. You've got to monitor these things on the cameras, put the cameras down, look to the left, open a door, like flash a light, close the door, look to the right, do the same thing, all while keeping an eye on your limited reserve of electricity, because if that runs out, you die. And so, like, you're thinking, man, looking at the cameras, looking left, looking right, opening doors, shutting doors, la 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 la, and then a jump scare happens. Because the game has kind of short-circuited your like ability for rational thought. It's kind of overwhelmed you, and you're kind of really in the zone of doing all these menial tasks. And that's like, you're suddenly, bam, really ready to be hit by like a scary fox jumping out at you, or a scary bunny jumping out at you, or whatever, time and time again. So it's kind of like a machine for producing these jump scares. Like, you constantly have to be involved in these menial tasks, and that constantly means that you're having to become sort of vulnerable to being scared by a scary thing jumping out at you. So that's kind of just one example of, I would say, how like a game's mechanics influence how you're scared. So it's not just like the presence of these scary, like uncanny valley, kind of creepy animatronic things, or there's a kind of ingredients, but the mechanics are important as well. So let's talk Ao Oni. Ao Oni is, which means blue demon in English incidentally, is a freeware horror game made in RPG Maker, developed by a female Japanese game dev called No Props. The latest version, I think version 6.32, was released in about 2009. And in Ao Oni, the conceit of this game is, you are one of a number of school children, and as all good school children do, you decide what would be a great laugh is to go to this abandoned mansion on the outskirts of town, where you've heard there's a monster that lives there. And so that happens, you go there. Obviously there can't be a monster, says your protagonist, Hiroshi, because ghosts don't exist. A fact that is kind of disproved about 5 seconds into the game when sort of the first monster appears and starts chasing you around the place. One by one, your friends are killed, and you have to escape this horrible mansion in which you find yourself trapped. The gameplay is split into kind of 2 modes. There is an adventure gamey solve puzzles kind of mode, and then there is a kind of an action-y kind of mode. So, oh man, I was supposed to use this slide. This is the first room of Ao Oni where like Takeshi's like, let's get out of here, which is really sensible. I'm so pleased that somebody suggested that shortly before the doors were locked permanently. So the kind of adventure gaming mode, you're going around, you're picking up items. Look there, like Hiroshi's picked up a plate shard, which will come in handy probably at some point. So you're picking up items and you're putting them in your inventory, and you're using those items in your inventory to solve puzzles. It's kind of the adventure game mode, like use plate shard on mysterious shadow on the wall, and oh look, there's a hidden door here. Or use Phillips screwdriver on like doorknob, and then put the doorknob on the door that doesn't have a door handle, that kind of thing. So that's the kind of adventure gamey part of Ao Oni, right? And then we have, what I've just described isn't necessarily very scary unless you have like an abhorrent fear of monkey items, like, no! Inventory-based puzzles! Get them away from me! That's the real horror. No, it's not the real horror. This is the kind of scary person here. This is the blue demon. Look at that! They're kind of uncanny and blue, and very frightening, especially if they're coming at you. The sort of the horror section kind of happens in two ways. There are like pre-scripted events that occur. So let's say that you're like going to the library and you pick up a key, and that flips a switch in the game state, and the game goes, ha ha ha, we're going to release the blue monster at you now, and the blue monster chases you and you run away. And then there's random scenes where you're just wandering about this house, and the monster pops up out of a door, because there's a script running in the background of the game at all times. It's going, and randomly now we'll send a monster after you. So there's kind of two things that happen. If you encounter the monster, you get a game over, you get a fail state. A fail state that didn't exist in the game before. And how you survive is you have to run away from the monster for a certain period of time. Again, it has a sense of powerlessness. You can't shoot the monster. You have to run away from the monster. And then sometimes you can hide in closets. If the monster doesn't see you, you can hide in a closet. And you can hide behind these jail cells. Even if the monster has seen you, you can shut the jail cell door and it'll shake the door at you and it'll get really angry and it'll run away, which is really improbable, but it happens anyhow. And I want to talk to you, the first section of this talk is just talking about how puzzles complement horror, right? So most of like the freeware horror games, to some extent, have some kind of puzzles or some kind of puzzle element to them. So even something like Vapor, where you're picking up like bits of a skeleton and throwing them in a fire, that's kind of like picking up an item, use skeleton piece on fire. That's kind of like a vestige of adventure games that exists in there. And like one of the reasons that's good is because these kind of puzzle elements force the player to move around the map. So, you know, if you put a basement door there and the basement door is locked, and then, you know, they go into, that means they have to go into the spooky forest to pick up the key so that they can go and take the key and use it to unlock the basement door. It forces the player to go into the spooky forest. So it's a way of kind of shuttling the player around the map and anticipating their movements. And if you know where the player is going, then you can set traps for them, you can scare the player. And similarly, it's a good way of measuring player intent. So you can go, aha, the player has just picked up the basement key. I'll wager they're probably going to go to the basement right now. And then you can unleash a monster at them. So that's kind of a very kind of surface level kind of reason that puzzles are good. They force people to backtrack, they force players to kind of move around the map, and you can use that to set up your scares on the player. With a view to Ao Oni specifically though, it has these kind of adventure game style puzzles, which means, you know, they're kind of obtuse and kind of nasty, right? There's this one that really annoys me, where you've got this piano kind of set up. I'm going to go into it like properly later on. It's just really obnoxious, where you wouldn't be able rationally, or I would wager that a large proportion of the players that play this game won't understand how to solve the puzzle at first blush. What that means is, if in an adventure game normally, if you can't solve a puzzle, what do? You wander around and you rub every item in your inventory on every other item in the game. You know, the ceremonial bust of King Henry VIII against, you know, the fly agaric, in the hope that, you know, maybe something will happen and progress will be made. And that's really good as far as Ao Oni is concerned, because what it wants you to do is wander around the map aimlessly, because then the blue demon can randomly appear and scare you and you can be afraid, and it can be a very oppressive experience. There's also another good reason why these sort of obnoxious adventure game style puzzles, like, that I would say would be bad design, maybe just an adventure game by itself, but in the context of a horror game, are very good. And it's something to do with what's called the two-factor theory of emotion. Has anyone come across this? Just disabuse yourself of the notion that I'm original. This comes from Chris's survival horror blog, originally by a couple of researchers in the 60s. Let's find out what their names are. Yes, Stanley Schachter and Jerome Singer, who are proposing kind of there's links between sort of emotional stimuli and psychological response. The TLDR version of this, right, is that if you're experiencing a strong emotion or excitement, or you're G'd up about something and you don't know the reason why, you can trick your brain into thinking it is for another reason if you supply your brain with another appropriate context. So what a later study did was it put a group of people in a scary situation with a researcher and a non-scary situation with a researcher, and it measured, or they asked people how sexually aroused they were to this person afterwards. And the people in the scary situation found themselves more aroused. And what sort of takeaway of this is that I'm not sexually aroused by the blue demon. That's on the takeaway. What I want to say here is that, like, the implications for game design is if you have a very hard horror game, the frustrations that the player is experiencing from, like, the fact they can't solve the puzzles can be kind of crossed over to, like, if you put them in a scary context with like scary monsters chasing them all around the place, they might mistake that frustration from your like puzzles being obtuse for actual fear. And I can't say how like accurate this theory is, but I will note that some of the most popular horror games that exist over the last couple of years are all very hard. The difficulty is all very, like, the difficulty level is very intense. And that might be one of the reasons, like, the more difficult the game is, actually, it also makes it scarier as well. I've forgotten where I am with my slides, so I'm going to click. What happens now? What's this? Oh, this is a piano puzzle. Yeah, I'm going to go onto the piano now. I really hate this fucking puzzle. So, Ao Oni kind of goes further and exploits a particular tendency of the player, or like it exploits player psychology and puzzle solutions in order to deliver its scares. So Christos is great talking about jump scares. Like one of the reasons like the jump scares work is because to use a kind of sort of the jump scare theory kind of comes from movies originally, where it's like you hear a scary noise or like there's a glass breaking. And it's like, ooh, there could be a scary thing, right? And you look around, and then oh, it was just the shutters knocking against the window outside, or oh, it was a cute little kitty cat. And then like 2 seconds afterwards, an axe-wielding murderer comes to get you and lodges an axe in your head, and oh, blood everywhere. It's very scary. This kind of misdirections we were talking about. How the particular misdirection works in Ao Oni is it uses, or no props, uses the moment of relief that comes from solving a really obnoxious puzzle in order to scare you. So you've got this piano here, right? You're in a room with a piano, you look at the piano's got blood on the keys. You're like, wow, there's something going on with these keys here. And also in the room, there is a safe with a 4-digit code, and it has some piano keys on. And you probably think to yourself, well, there's probably something I have to do with these piano keys and solving the problem here. I wonder if I could wipe the piano. If only there was some item in the game that allowed you to wipe the piano, and there is. There is a handkerchief. You can't use a handkerchief to clean the piano. And the reason is because you need the soap. You have to combine the soap with the handkerchief in order to wipe the piano. And it's very annoying. So here we go, I've got the soap in my freaking inventory, and you have to combine the soap with the handkerchief first. You can't just have it around. And look, now Hiroshi wipes the piano with a handkerchief, no mention of soap, mind you. And then look, a number has appeared, 915. You need to think, like, when I was in this situation, I was like, oh, finally, I've solved this freaking piano puzzle. I know exactly what to do with those numbers. I'm going to go over to the safe next and put in the code. And what do you think happened when I was looking at those piano keys? BAM! Yeah. Who wants to right behind you? Ah! You got to be scared now. So it's like that particular moment of relief when you've solved a difficult puzzle, and then BAM! Use it to deliver a moment of horror. And it's not just you've altered the game state, so it's not just that Slender thing where you pick up a page, or in the many Slender clones where you pick up a thing and then it sends the monster after you. It has to be because you've solved a difficult puzzle and you've encountered a moment of relief that this part of the horror works. So let's talk horror and terror, and that's something that Helen talked about very effectively as well. Like horror and terror are two kind of different things. To kind of summarize my take on this, like terror is like the anticipation, right? It's like, there could be a horrible monster coming for me, and then like, horror is, there's a horrible monster coming for me, ah! You can't have terror without horror because it's like making a threat you're never gonna kind of capitalize on. You can threaten someone like, I got a knife, I'm gonna stab you up, and if you never reveal the knife at any point, then no one's going to believe you. So you can't extend terror throughout a game unless you have some horror as well. What I think is interesting, oh no, I'm going too far. We'll leave that up there for now. What I think interesting, whoa, no, don't do that, mouse pointer, down. No, my brain's unraveling like a cat with yarn. So, what I was going to talk about, yes, horror and terror. So, like, the terror in Ao Oni is wandering around the corridors and never knowing when the monster's going to appear. And you never know when the monster's going to appear. For two reasons. The unpredictability of these scripted sequences, which are really obnoxious, like the monster jumping out of the floor, and again, coming from areas that sort of violate the sanctity of the spaces in the rooms, as again Christos was talking about, but also just because of this script that runs in the background that means, bam, the monster can pop up at any time. So you're constantly living in fear of this monster. And then the horror is when the monster appears and suddenly chases you. But actually, I think the tension between the two genres of the game really contributes to what makes that horror horrifying. Let me explain. Let me back up a second there. So, like, you're trying to play this adventure game puzzle type deal, right? Where there is no fail state. You're trying to solve the puzzles and move on to the next stage and escape. But you can't just do that, because if you do that and you get involved in the adventure game puzzle, then you're going to have the monster appear randomly and you're going to get killed and you're going to have to start again. So, like, the horror is not just the fact that there's a scary blue thing, which admittedly is scary in itself, right? And I'm not going to say that running away from a scary blue thing is not horrifying, because it is. But it's also the mechanical implications, right? That blue demon represents a failed state. That blue demon represents a game over that didn't exist in your adventure game before. And that blue demon represents the fact that now I gotta stop thinking in adventure game mode, and I gotta start thinking twitch reflexes around tight corridors, and oh man, where is the jail cell again? I hope I'm running in the right direction. Nope, it's a dead end. Guess I'm dead. So that's part of the horror, is sort of the tension between the two genres. Okay, so that concludes my very puzzle-focused segment. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the kind of fiction of the game, the narrative, and how the mechanics kind of reinforce that. Has anyone played The Uncle Who Works at Nintendo that was released recently? Yes. Oh, good. I really thoroughly recommend it. It's a fantastic twine game by Michael at Correlated Contents. It's really, really good. If you complete the game and you get all the endings, you actually unlock these really cool like bits of writing which talk about various elements of horror. And one of these essays, or like, it's not really an essay, like it's a couple of paragraphs, it's on creepypasta. And I thought it was really, really good, because in it, Michael kind of talks about like what the true horror of a horror game is. So let me just quote here. To paraphrase Zizek, is that how you say Zizek? I've always said Zizek, so I've never heard it. Is it Zizek? God damn, that sounds so uncultured. to paraphrase Zizek, you can just edit that bit out, right? To paraphrase, the key to understanding a horror story is to imagine the same story, but without the horror element. When we do this, we can locate on some level the true horror, the thing that must be fantasized and fictionalized in order that it becomes a digestible, entertaining horror story, rather than just something truly unpleasant. So, like, take away the puzzles, take away the monster chase sequences. What's horrifying about Ao Oni? I went to a house with my friends, and then they stopped being my friends. That's the horror. Through that lens, that's the horror of Ao Oni, right? It's the horror of being alone, which is what so many kind of horror games touch on. The horror of being by yourself and having your friends turn against you. And so, like, this is to look at my notes very quickly. So yeah, I have slides for this. Yes! So, you can see you're talking to Taka over there, Mika over there, and they're all very involved with their really terrible dialogue. But what your friends in the game mean mechanically, apart from just kind of a respite, is that whenever you're talking to one of the other people in the mansion in Ao Oni, you are categorically always safe. The monster never, ever, ever, ever attacks you if you're talking to somebody else. So these friends represent a kind of safe space in the game where you can go, I'm talking to somebody, I don't have to worry about being attacked by a monster. It's a moment of relief, right? But what happens over the course of the game is it's not just the monster that kills your friends, because that would be almost too easy, right? The monster doesn't just kill your friends. The monster turns your friends against you. The monster makes your friends into other monsters. So one of my favorite scares in the game is, like, Mika over there has just been, like, killed. So the monster's fallen apart and ripped into pieces, and you've seen her dead, and it's kind of gross. And then later, you get the key to the basement, you go in the basement, and then you walk on the corridor, and you see, oh man, it's Mika at the end of the corridor. Oh, phew, because I thought she was dead, right? It turns out she's alive, everything's going to be okay afterwards. So you walk over to Mika, and you can probably imagine what happens, like Mika kind of morphs and becomes slightly blue, and grows a giant blue head with like a Mika-style wig, and then runs after you because she's a monster as well now. Oh my god, Mika turned into a monster! I'm not safe anymore. And this happens over the course of the game, like, you know, like Takuro and Takeshi, they also turn into monsters. And like the more of your friends become monsters, the harder the game gets, because like you might be running away from one. And there's this really annoying sequence where you're running away from like this Domo-kun kind of character that's turned into an Ao Oni. It was very bizarre. And then like that, if you run into the wrong room, another one pops up and you have to run from multiple ones at the same time. And it's really terrifying. So mechanically, the game is kind of reinforcing this notion of like the horror of being alone. And it's also leveraging something that exists outside of the game, right? And I feel like, hopefully I'm not too reaching here, but this is something that I experience. Like to play a horror game, you're normally playing it by yourself. Like you're playing it by yourself and you're being alone. And so it kind of intensifies that feeling of loneliness. And what kills your friends in Ao Oni? It's playing a game. And that kind of also leverages the social stigma of just sitting in your room playing games, because playing games is antisocial, right? Oh, do you want to come out tonight? I'm going to go to VideoBrains, it'll be amazing. Nah, I'm going to play Mass Effect. I just download it from Steam, it's pretty awesome. So, there's a kind of stigma of playing games, and so there's a feeling that the monster is not just content with doing you harm in the game, but it wants to cause you harm outside of the game as well. It wants to make you scared, it wants to make you lose your friends, you're going to be alone forever. Isn't that scary? So that's kind of one of the horrifying things about it. And I know I need to wrap up now. I'm going to talk about one final point, and we'll get to the end. So, this is another meta point. Ao Oni has made an RPG maker, right? Which is like the worst fucking choice for a horror game ever. Like, objectively, if you think about it. It's something that Cameron Kunzelman touches on in a review of Ib, which I recommend you check out. But, like, RPG Maker, it's top-down view. You can see everything. There isn't any kind of hidden information. You can't really trick the player. There's a couple of candle segments, but those don't really count because they're like 1% of the game, so I'm going to gloss over them. And also, you can save at pretty much any time. Can you see that there? It says save. If I'm scared, I'm just going to open the menu and hit save. So, like, for many reasons, RPG Maker is terrible choice for a horror game, but it worked. And the reason it's genius here is because it's that idea of the uncanny. For me, someone who's played a lot of RPG Maker games, this is really horrifying. You're taking an engine which is used to make RPGs, and what are RPGs but optimistic, but positivist? An RPG, by its mechanics, is saying, there is no enemy you cannot defeat in this world. You will just have to work hard and level up, and you can just beat anyone, and also be infinitely rich. But this is taking an engine of empowerment, and it's turning it into something that's disempowering you. It's like saying, there are monsters you can't defeat. When the blue demon runs into you, you don't get a battle sequence. It's not like do, and you can't cast like fire on the blue demon or something. Even though the engine suggests it, you just get an automatic game over, which is really unfair. And so one of my favourite scares, which is the final scare of the game that happens in this, is you open up your pause menu, which is like it's an exogenous part of the game, right? It's not actually part of the core game. But when you open up your pause menu to solve the final puzzle, your friend Takara, who's rejoined you, BAM! Turns into a blue demon! You open up your pause menu and the pause menu's been compromised! There's a demon inside my pause menu! Gotta run away! And so, like, although Ao Oni kind of feels and smells like an RPG, it's not. It's just wearing RPG Maker as a skin. Which is, it's really kind of terrifying. So to wrap up and to kind of conclude this one here, so difficult puzzles are very good from a sort of horror game design because it makes your player run around the map. You can anticipate where they're going when they've picked up certain key items. You can make them backtrack over familiar terrain and scare them. And also, the harder puzzles are, maybe the more scared they'll be. In particular, adventure game puzzles, you can exploit a moment of relief to really kind of fuck your players up. And then finally, there's in kind of an example of ludonarrative concordance, for want of a better phrase. Like, if you work out what the true horror of your game is about, right, when you take all the gameplay away, and try and introduce design elements that reinforce it, like the mechanics to do with your friends in Ao Oni. Thank you very much for your time.